Certain teachers and different movements within Christianity will often claim that we've got the crucifixion and the resurrection dates wrong. Not only has the church maybe misinterpreted the evidence, but in fact it's been corrupted or has been deceived when it teaches these things, according to its critics. We get two different dates offered for the crucifixion, either the Wednesday afternoon or even the Thursday. Usually these seem motivated by an attempt to get a literal 72 hours in between the crucifixion and the resurrection. If Jesus were crucified on Wednesday, then this gives you a Sabbath day resurrection 72 hours later, 3 days and 3 nights later. And this would give credence to those who want to observe a Jewish seventh-day Sabbath instead of the first day, Lord's Day. So we see one of the causes for this appears to be the interpretation of 3 days and 3 nights. However, this requires that we ignore the many more attestations to Jesus saying he was going to raise on the third day. The third day motif and evidence will be explored in another video. In this one, I want to explore the chronology of Passion Week and show how it doesn't allow for a Last Supper on Tuesday or Wednesday, or crucifixion Wednesday or Thursday. The other problem is that John is read in a wooden way and then is read against the Synoptics, making it contradictory and giving it prevalence over the Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptics clearly and unambiguously say that the Last Supper was a Passover meal, but then the critics will say that John is putting the Last Supper before the Passover and is therefore correct. I don't know how they can continue to read the Bible and say that the Synoptics are this far wrong. What we'll see from all the Gospels when we read the chronology is that they actually harmonize together and teach the same thing. Each one starts Passion Week with a Triumphal Entry. I haven't seen anybody argue that this Triumphal Entry is not Palm Sunday, so we can start from there. No Gospel is going to account for every single day of the week, but we have to read what's happening during the week, including the references to the resurrection, the Sabbath, the preparation day, etc., in order to see what's happening. Matthew has clearly compressed time right at the beginning here, because Mark tells us that when Jesus entered the temple, he first came in and looked around. Then he went out to the Mount of Olives and to Bethany. He returned in the morning and cursed the fig tree, returned again to the Mount of Olives that evening, and again on Tuesday morning was entering the temple and saw the cursed fig tree. When Matthew takes these days, he has Jesus show up at the temple, go out to the Mount of Olives, and then curse the fig tree in the morning. And as people have all noted, Matthew has the Gospel of Mark in front of him when he's writing. So he's not contradicting him, and he's not saying that this is something different. In fact, he's just saying Jesus goes out at night to the Mount of Olives and returns in the morning to the temple. And on the morning, he cursed the fig tree and it was destroyed. Because Mark has cleared up the fact that the fig tree withered on Tuesday, when Matthew mentions this in chapter 21, and he says that the people were questioning him, this turns out to be on a Tuesday. And then it says in verse 46, no one could say a word in reply, and from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. This is already Tuesday, and we're talking about things that are going to happen from that day on. So it's impossible that he's going to be taken by arrest that evening and crucified the next day. In fact, the next day they were asking him questions. With no time elapsed, it makes no sense. There's no point to say that from that day on, nobody dared to ask him any questions. In fact, according to the chronology that would have him die on Wednesday, there was no time to ask those questions anyway. In Matthew 26, we have, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover is 2 days away. The Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. So we know this is at least Tuesday that this is happening, and the Passover is 2 days away. Because of the difficulty in reckoning days, we can't nail this down for certain. If this is Tuesday afternoon, then 2 days from then could be Thursday afternoon, and the Passover could be starting there. If this is Wednesday, the Passover could be starting 2 days from now, either Thursday evening or Friday. But we're definitely looking at Thursday, Friday for Passover here, with Jesus saying this at least on a Tuesday or later. So there's no way he's crucified on Wednesday, nor is there any chance really that he was crucified on the Thursday. Even if he's saying this on a Tuesday, then the Synoptics have him 2 days later on Thursday, having the Passover meal before his crucifixion. Luke 22 verse 13 tells us, they left and found these things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer, for I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are all confirming that the Passover was prepared and eaten by Jesus. This completely contradicts the idea that John is teaching the Last Supper was not a Passover meal. With the Passover 2 days away, Matthew 26:3 tells us that the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and to kill him. So here it's at least Tuesday, and they're only now starting to scheme to arrest and kill him. There's no chance that they would have him by Tuesday night to crucify him by Wednesday on this timeline. Verse 6 of Matthew 26, while Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. So here we have that the plot to kill him is occurring at least after Tuesday, and after that's stated, then he's at Bethany again. So again, this makes impossible an arrest and crucifixion from Tuesday night to Wednesday afternoon. Following this, in verse 14, Judas then goes to the chief priests and asks them what they're willing to give him to betray Jesus. It says on verse 16, from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. All of these events are happening at least after the Tuesday event of the withering of the fig tree. So we have the chief priests are plotting to kill Jesus. We have him now show up in Bethany, and then Judas approaches the chief priests and starts to look for an opportunity to kill Jesus. When would this opportunity arise? Certainly not Tuesday night, and it's starting to look like we're getting too deep in for it even to be a Wednesday night. In Mark 11:1, we have the Triumphal Entry as Jesus comes to the Mount of Olives, and he sends his 2 disciples for the donkey. In chapter 11, verse 11 is where we see that Jesus entered the temple and then already went out to Bethany with the 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry, and that's when he cursed the fig tree. We get another evening in verse 19. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. So Sunday night he was out in Bethany, and Monday morning he cursed the fig tree. Tuesday he's leaving the city again, and in the morning, in verse 20, as they came along, they see that the fig tree had withered. So Mark has cleared up the chronology and showed us that Matthew has compressed 1 day there. Mark also defines another period of time for us in chapter 12, verses 18 to 27. Here's where we see that the Sadducees questioning Jesus were doing so on the Tuesday at least. It's in Mark 12, after the withering of the fig tree on Tuesday, that we get the account of the Sadducees questioning Jesus about marriage and the resurrection, already alluded to in Matthew. So this is the defining time that shows us that that's at least on Tuesday in Matthew, when after that they would not dare to ask him any more questions. Then it appears in Mark 13 when the disciples are asking Jesus on the Mount of Olives about the fate of the temple in Jerusalem, that this Olivet discourse is probably happening on Tuesday yet, although we haven't seen definitively any other dates discussed. So it's at the earliest Tuesday and could be as late as Wednesday. Like Matthew, both Mark and Luke will settle in and talk about the 2 days before the Passover. Mark 14:14 tells us, now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away. We see Mark actually using the two synonymously. This is common of the period. Josephus did this, where he talks about the 14th of Nisan through the 21st, which is officially Passover on the 14th, and then 15 to 21 is unleavened bread. He refers to this 8-day period as Passover. In other places, he refers to it all as unleavened bread. The two titles can become synonymous and can encompass the exact same period of time. This is important throughout our study here. Like Matthew, Mark is talking here about the anointing of Jesus in the home of Simon the leper by the woman with the alabaster jar. So this again is at least Tuesday, if not later. Like Matthew, he also shows us that Judas Iscariot then went to the chief priests to betray Jesus. Finally, in verse 12, on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover? You see that interchangeability here. Again, they're getting ready to sacrifice the lamb. The disciples specifically say that they're going to eat the Passover with Jesus, but this is the first day of the festival. So we're interchanging the terms again. Passover day, the 14th Nisan, is now incorporated into the unleavened bread festival. In Luke 19, we get Jesus' triumphal entry on the first day of the week, and Luke tells us that every day he was teaching at the temple. In the Greek, it says the days. This is a plural. It says every day he was teaching in the temple, every night he was at the Mount of Olives. So days and nights. This is a little unusual if we're only talking about 1 or 2 days or nights. To use this kind of terminology, you would expect there should be at least 3, if not more. In Luke 20, he says, "One day as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple courts and proclaiming the good news, the chief priests and teachers of the law together with the elders came up to him." This is the same questioning we saw in Mark and Matthew, which is on a Tuesday. If he's saying one day, you can tell that it's not the last day of Jesus' life. It's one of many days that are being accounted for here, even though Luke does not name and describe any more of them, other than to say days and nights. Once again, in Luke 21, we see that each day Jesus was teaching at the temple, and each evening he went out to spend the night on the hill called the Mount of Olives. This is at the Olivet Discourse, potentially Tuesday and perhaps Wednesday, as we've seen in both Mark and Matthew already. If he were captured Tuesday night and then crucified Wednesday, he couldn't have been there to teach each day and go out each night, very realistically, because you're only talking about 2 mornings. You would have said both mornings or both evenings. In Luke 22:1, we find now the festival of unleavened bread, called the Passover, was approaching. So again, we see that frame where Passover and unleavened bread are seen as the same thing. So unleavened bread starts on the 14th, when the day is actually officially Passover, and Passover actually is seen to extend throughout the festival of unleavened bread, as the two are approached here as synonymous once again. Once again, we see here in chapter 22:2 that the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of him. And then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. We're certainly after Tuesday when this is happening. Judas is then now watching for an opportunity to hand Jesus over. If he's watching for the opportunity, it's certainly going to take more than a day. Luke 22:7 says, "Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed." Here again we see the conflation of the two. Passover lamb is sacrificed on the 14th of Nisan. Passover meal is at the evening of 14 Nisan, which is our Thursday. And unleavened bread technically should start on the Friday, but the two are conflated. On that day, Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." The Synoptics are clear that this is what he's doing. He's eating the Passover. Notice also that no earlier than Tuesday, we had the questioning up by the Sadducees, and they're plotting to kill Jesus. And this says, "And then came the day." So we've gone at least one more day, so we're at least on Wednesday when Jesus is preparing the Passover, which he's going to eat with the disciples. Absolutely, the Tuesday capture and arrest and the Wednesday crucifixion are ruled out. We still potentially have a Wednesday capture and Thursday crucifixion, but we have to find Passover on Wednesday then. It's not like we can say this is occurring before the Passover. So when we find out that it's 2 days before Passover, we have a little bit of a question in our mind. What day is that exactly? And we can actually find out from John. The critics actually point to John as the gospel that disproves this chronology that I'm giving right now. But if you read John from prior to the Triumphal Entry, you find out he counts it down exactly as we would in the Synoptics. In John, we find Jesus in Bethany being anointed, and we're told that it is 6 days before the Passover. So we're going to be counting down from there 6 days. But it then says the next day he entered Jerusalem. So the anointing referred to by John is on Saturday. That's 6 days prior to the Passover. Sunday obviously then is 5 days before. On this accounting, Monday is 4 days before, Tuesday is 3 days before, and Wednesday then is 2 days before. So it's very likely all these references in Mark, Matthew, and Luke to 2 days before the Passover are occurring on our Wednesday. Thursday then is the day of the Passover, and the meal occurs at the 14th in the evening as the day turns. Now what we also want to do is explore the terms, the Sabbath day and the preparation day. By this time, preparation day was an official name of the Friday, the day before the Sabbath. Everybody agrees with this, that preparation day is the 6th day of the week before the Sabbath, the 7th day. But what the critics are saying is there's actually another preparation day sandwiched into this week and another Sabbath day. They want Jesus crucified on Wednesday, calling this a preparation day of the Passover, giving us a Sabbath on the Thursday, giving us another day of preparation on the Friday, a day in which you could shop and do other things, and then a day of Sabbath again on the Saturday. Some will push those days together and have the preparation day Thursday, the Passover as preparation day on Friday, and another Sabbath on the Saturday. None of the Gospels makes any mention of these multiple Sabbaths and multiple preparation days. They don't even leave room for it. Mark 15 tells us very early in the morning, this is the day Jesus was crucified, The chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. In verse 42, it was preparation day. And Mark defines this for us because he's writing in Rome to an audience that may need this information. That is the day before Sabbath. Likewise, Mark told us that Passover and unleavened bread were the same thing. He's teaching his audience what he's talking about. So Jesus, very early in the morning on Friday, was tried by the Sanhedrin and then crucified. And this was the preparation day before the day of Sabbath. We have no ambiguity in here of another preparation day or another Sabbath day. Then we find out as evening approached that Joseph of Arimathea came to take the body and bury him. As this continues in Mark 16, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go anoint Jesus' body. So we get 3 days accounted for immediately: preparation day, Sabbath day, and the day after the Sabbath when they come to anoint Jesus. If we had extra days in there, if we had a preparation on Wednesday and a Sabbath on Thursday for Passover, and then a preparation day again on Friday, they could have easily anointed him on Friday, but they didn't. Why would they have waited that extra day? Why doesn't Mark account for any extra days here? Following that verse, we see in verse 2, very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. So again, preparation day is crucifixion day. That's Friday. Mark tells us that they stayed home on Saturday and did not anoint the body, which was the Sabbath. The very next day, when the Sabbath ended, he tells us when the Sabbath was over, it was the first day of the week. It's not a special Sabbath that occurred in the middle of the week. It's the one right on the 7th day, right before they go to anoint Jesus on the first day. And on that first day, Mark tells us in verse 9, when Jesus rose early on the first day of the week. Unambiguous that he rose on the first day of the week. Of course, this is in the long ending of Mark. So this can be dismissed because we are pretty sure this is not an original ending. However, where did it come from? It comes from the early church. The early church believed, obviously, that Jesus rose on the first day of the week. They were also comfortable putting this into the Bible and teaching this. There is a good chance that the original ending of Mark actually said this, and that this synopsis of the long ending has been affixed to it to explain the missing ending. Nonetheless, let's move on to Luke 23, verse 54 is about the preparation day. He says it was preparation day and the Sabbath was about to begin. So again, this is not a special preparation day or a special Sabbath, a second preparation day or a second Sabbath of the week. This is the preparation day, which is the official name of the day before the 7th-day Sabbath. In verse 55, the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. So they're watching the burial again in all 3 synoptics. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes. But they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. What commandment is there to rest on the Sabbath? The 4th commandment. This is the commandment you don't have to define. If you're resting on the Sabbath according to the commandment, you're talking about the 7th-day Sabbath. Matthew 27, verse 57 tells us the same thing. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. We see him bearing the body and the women watching again. In verse 62, the next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and Pharisees went to Pilate. So again, Jesus is crucified on preparation day. The very next day is the one after preparation day. That's the Sabbath. And this is where they go and talk to the Pharisees about getting a guard. So then why don't we go on to John 19? We've seen that John actually gives us a perfect countdown to Passover, starting on the Saturday with the anointing, 6 days before the Passover. The Triumphal Entry is Sunday, and we count down to Passover 6 days on the Thursday and Friday. So John 19, apparently the problematic passages, it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. So they've got Jesus dying on the day of preparation of the Passover. So that's how they shoehorn in an extra day. They're saying this isn't the Friday preparation day, it's the preparation of the Passover, the very Passover day. But we've seen from all the Gospels that Passover and unleavened bread can refer to the same thing. So this is the Sabbath that occurs within the Passover week. It's not a different Sabbath, but it is a special Sabbath because it occurs within this celebration. Verse 31, John goes on, now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. So there we have, it's the day of preparation, not the day of a special preparation or a different preparation, but the day of preparation. It is Friday. And this is a special Sabbath because it's the Sabbath within the Passover week. Luke is going to sum certain things up for us later on in terms of how to count 3 days and 3 nights, or on the third day. But to sum up this chronology that we've seen so far, verse by verse through all the Synoptics and John, we can go to Luke 24. And this is the first day of the week. And this is the Emmaus Road Experience. I'll have to read several verses here. Chapter 24, verse 1. On the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. So this is the first day of the week, and the women have rested on the Sabbath, and they have come to anoint Jesus as we expect. We don't see them coming to anoint him on any other day of the week after any other Sabbath, but after the weekly 7-day Sabbath. He's not there, so of course the presumption in these stories is that he has risen that day, but people can tell you, well, no, he raised on the 7th day, and so they find the tomb empty on the first day. However, verse 4, we see them speaking with some angels. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, verse 7, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise. So now the angels are telling the women, Jesus has risen on the 3rd day. That's why he's not here on the first day of the week when they come to anoint him. So far, nothing definitive, right? But in verse 13, that very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus. So this is the same day, the first day of the week. The 2 are going to Emmaus when Jesus encounters them. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. As they tell Jesus about the events that have happened, they start to outline the days to him. They talk about how the priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. Verse 21, But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things happened. Recall, the angels told the women that Jesus would rise on the 3rd day. This is Sunday, the first day of the week. The same day, these disciples say, today is now that 3rd day. So the day of resurrection is the Sunday, the first day of the week. The angel said that he would rise on the 3rd day. They are saying this is the 3rd day since this happened, and this is the first day of the week. Verse 22, Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, but they did not find his body. They came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. After Jesus leaves them in Emmaus, they get up and go back to Jerusalem and said that this is the very same day. They rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem in verse 33, and they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered. And as they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, Peace to you. In verse 44, Then he said to them, These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Verse 45, Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. Verse 46, And said to them, Thus it is written that the Christ should suffer, and on the 3rd day rise from the dead. So this chapter 24 of Luke sums up everything for us. The women are at the tomb on the first day of the week. They don't find Jesus, and they find the angels who say, Jesus told you he was going to rise on the 3rd day. Jesus goes and speaks to the disciples on their way to Emmaus, and they say, This is the 3rd day since he was crucified. Jesus comes to all the disciples back in Jerusalem, and he tells them, in accordance with what the disciples have just said, this is the 3rd day since these things all happened, that he himself had said he had to rise on the 3rd day. So all of the chronology points to the same thing. Jesus died on Friday, the day of preparation before the Sabbath. He was in the grave the Sabbath day, and the women who wanted to anoint his body couldn't do so on the Sabbath. They came on the first day. Mark says that he rose on the first day, but if you dismiss that verse, you find out that he rose on the first day anyway, because the angel said he was going to rise this day, and Jesus himself confirmed that he would rise this day, the 3rd day, which the disciples affirmed to Jesus' face, this day is that 3rd day. So when all the synoptics agree 100% on this, it's a real contrivance to look at John force readings into it, force days of preparation and days of Sabbath in there that aren't there, in order to make it contradict the Synoptics, and then to make it overrule the Synoptics, which specifically tell us that Jesus ate the Passover with his disciples the night that he was arrested and then crucified. Why not read the Bible as though it's telling the truth, and that all the books are right, and read John in light of the other three? Next, I'll talk about what it means to say that Jesus was in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights, and what the 3 day motif means. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.